Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving deep into something that impacts all of us. It's the bullwhip effect.
Oh yeah, the bullwhip effect.
We've got some great excerpts here from a 1997 Sloan Management Review article to help us break it all down.
Okay, cool.
Ever get frustrated when your favorite store is out of something? Or why prices seem to jump all over the place?
Yeah.
The bullwhip effect may be why. It's like this. Even small changes in what we buy can cause huge problems in the supply chain.
Yeah, like a whip.
Yeah, exactly. The handle barely moves, but the end snaps with crazy force.
And what's interesting is it doesn't even take massive shifts in demand to trigger this. Like, even tiny variations can get magnified.
Oh, really?
At every single step of the supply chain. Like the article gives this example of Pampers diapers.
Okay.
You'd think demand for those would be pretty steady, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But P&G noticed that while consumer sales stayed pretty much the same, the orders they were getting from retailers were way more volatile. And then the orders those retailers were getting from wholesalers were even crazier. By the time you get to the folks supplying the raw materials, it's like the demand signal is going bonkers.
Oh, that's a little scary. It's like a game of telephone gone wrong, where the message gets distorted with each pass.
Exactly. And the article even has this visual figure 1 that shows how those order fluctuations grow bigger and bigger the further up you go.
Huh.
From the retailer to the wholesaler, then the manufacturer, and then finally to the supplier. Makes you realize how even these small changes in what we buy can have a ripple effect.
So I'm beginning to understand how this works.
Ooh.
But I also read about this simulation they call the beer game.
Oh, the beer game.
Yeah, and it kind of brought the bullwhip effect to life.
Yeah.
It simulates the supply chain to show how these things play out.
Yeah, the beer game is a classic way to show the dynamics of this. It really highlights how even when everyone's trying to do the right thing and make smart decisions, things can still go totally haywire.
Walk me through it. How does it work?
Well, imagine just 4 players. A factory, a distributor, a wholesaler, and a retailer.
Okay.
Their goal is to meet customer demand for beer at the lowest possible cost. But there's a catch. There are delays in information. And each player only sees what's happening at their own level. Kind of like how companies make decisions based on incomplete or outdated data in the real world.
Right. Because no one has a crystal ball to see what's coming. So what typically happens in this game?
Well, even with small changes in customer demand at the retail level, you start to see these huge overreactions further up. The factory makes way too much beer. The distributor has stockpiles gathering dust and everyone's scrambling.
So even though they're trying to do the right thing, this lack of clear communication and shared info leads to chaos. It's like they're overcompensating because they don't know what's really going on.
Exactly. And it kind of shows why this bullwhip effect is such a big problem everywhere. It's not just about diapers or beer. It can happen in any industry. Like tech gadgets or the food we eat, it can happen anywhere.
Okay, so we're seeing how this bullwhip effect can create these serious problems, but what are the main causes? Like, why does it happen in the first place?
So the article breaks it down into 4 key causes: demand forecasting order, batching price fluctuations, and rationing and shortage gaming.
All right, let's go through those. First up, demand forecasting. What's the problem there?
Well, companies use forecasts to try and predict future demand, which makes sense. But these forecasts are often based on historical data and can be easily thrown off by those short-term blips.
Okay.
Plus, each part of the supply chain might adjust its forecast based on the orders it's receiving. So it creates this ripple effect where small adjustments get amplified as they move upstream.
It's like that telephone game again. Each person changes the message a little, and by the end, it's totally different.
Exactly. So companies end up either overestimating or underestimating demand, which throws off their whole production and inventory planning.
Makes sense. Now, what about order batching? How does that play a role?
To save money, companies often place large, infrequent orders instead of smaller, more frequent ones, like to save on shipping or ordering fees.
Okay.
The article even has this diagram figure 2 to illustrate it. It shows how a company might order a ton every few weeks rather than a smaller amount daily.
Got it.
While this seems efficient for that one company, it creates these artificial spikes in demand that aren't actually real.
Right, so those big infrequent orders create a ripple effect, just like the inaccurate forecasts.
Exactly. And that leads us to price fluctuations. Those sales and promotions that stores love so much can actually contribute to the bullwhip effect too.
Wait, really? How does that work? I thought discounts would make people buy more and create a more stable demand.
You would think so, but think about what happens when there's a buy one, get one free deal. You're more likely to stock up even if you don't need that much right now.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely guilty of that.
Hmm.
Especially with snacks or toiletries. Why not save some money, right?
Exactly. And when everyone does that, it creates a huge surge in orders during the promotion, then a sharp drop-off when it's over. This makes it hard for suppliers to keep up.
So it's less about the total amount sold and more about the timing of the orders.
You got it. And that brings us to the last one, rationing and shortage gaming.
Yeah.
This one gets a bit more intense.
Intense how?
Well, imagine there's a shortage of something, maybe a key component or a popular product. Customers worried about being left out start inflating their orders to try and get more than they actually need.
It's that fear of missing out. I've been there, especially when you hear rumors of shortages.
Yeah.
You start thinking, better grab some extra just in case.
Yeah, exactly. Totally understandable, but it makes the problem worse. Suppliers see this huge spike in ramp-up production. But when that perceived shortage ends, they're left with too much.
So it's this vicious cycle where fear and uncertainty drive these extreme reactions, which then just distort the supply chain further.
You nailed it.
Wow, this is a lot to think about. Inaccurate forecasts, bulk ordering sales, and the fear factor are all fueling this crazy bullwhip effect. But the article also talks about how to fix these problems right.
It does.
These supply chain coordination initiatives. This is where things start to get really interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's time for a little break, but we'll be right back to talk about those solutions.
Great. So before the break, we were looking at all the things that fuel this bullwhip effect. But the article doesn't just leave us with the problem. It outlines some solutions, and that's what I find really interesting.
I'm ready to hear how we contain this thing.
Yeah.
I was reading about breaking down those massive orders into smaller, more frequent deliveries.
Yeah. And the article actually says that can improve efficiency, even though it seems kind of counterintuitive.
Right, because wouldn't that increase costs? Like, wouldn't more deliveries cost more?
Well, there's usually a big price difference between shipping a full truckload versus a less than truckload.
Oh, right.
Companies often feel like they need to fill up those trucks to get the lower rate, but that leads to those big, infrequent orders that make the bullwhip even worse.
So breaking it down into smaller shipments could actually reduce those wild swings in demand.
Exactly. And even though it seems like it might cost more, the overall benefits can outweigh the costs. The article even highlights how P&G found that shipping smaller quantities of different products lowered their costs and helped them adapt more quickly.
So instead of looking at the cost of each delivery, they're thinking about the big picture and how smoother deliveries benefit everyone.
Right. Challenging those assumptions about what efficiency really means. It's a great example of how looking at the whole supply chain, not just one piece, can lead to better solutions.
Okay, that makes sense. The article also mentions stabilizing prices as a way to reduce the bullwhip effect. Now, this one seems a little counterintuitive. Don't those changing prices reflect changes in supply and demand?
That's what we're often led to believe. But the article says that those frequent promotions and discounts can actually make the bullwhip worse. It's like creating this artificial roller coaster of demand.
We touched on this before, but can you go into more detail?
Sure. Imagine you're a retailer and a supplier offers a huge discount if you buy a ton up front.
Yeah, I'd probably stock up. I mean, who doesn't love a deal?
Exactly. And that's how these price fluctuations create those booms and busts. Retailers buy a lot during the sale, then demand drops when the price goes back up. Throws off the whole system.
So it's like everyone's guessing, trying to anticipate the next price change, and that creates more chaos.
Right. Makes it really tough for manufacturers to plan, for distributors to manage inventory, for retailers to avoid having too much or too little stock.
The article mentioned P&G, again, as an example of a company that's moved away from those big price swings. What are they doing?
They've shifted to something called everyday low pricing. The idea is to offer stable prices all the time without those big sales that encourage people to stock up.
So it's about creating predictability and stability in the system. I can see how that would help.
Exactly. And the article says that P&G has seen some really positive results. They've been able to smooth out demand, lower inventory costs, and even improve their relationships with retailers.
So everyone wins when there's less guesswork.
That's the point. And speaking of transparency, the article also talks about how to deal with that shortage gaming behavior. You know, when people start hoarding because they think they'll run out.
Oh, yeah, I've done that.
Yeah.
It's like this fear takes over and you just start buying like crazy.
Totally. But there are ways companies can help with this. The key is communication and trust.
Okay, how do they do that?
Well, if a company is facing a real shortage, they need to be upfront about it, give realistic timelines, and set up fair systems for distributing what they do have.
So not just letting people hoard.
Right. The article gave this example of Texas Instruments when they had a shortage of semiconductors. Instead of just giving out chips based on who ordered the most, they looked at their customers' past sales data, how much inventory they had, and how urgently they needed the chips.
So they were trying to be fair.
Exactly. And that kind of fairness builds trust. It makes customers feel like they're being treated well, even when things are tough.
Yeah, it makes you think about those small decisions can have a big impact. Like if you know a company is going to be fair, you're less likely to panic.
That's the idea. It's about shifting from that every man for himself mentality to something more collaborative. Because a stable supply chain benefits everyone.
This deep dive has been so insightful. We've explored how those tiny changes in what we buy can create this massive chain reaction, and we've learned about how companies are trying to smooth things out.
It really is fascinating how it all works.
But now I think it's time to shift gears a bit and think about our role as consumers in all of this, because we're the ones driving that demand in the first place.
That's a great point.
Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll talk about what WE can do to help tame this bullwhip effect. We're back for the final part of our deep dive into the bullwhip effect. We've seen how these little ripples in consumer demand can turn into tsunamis further up the supply chain, and we've uncovered some smart ways that companies are working to smooth things out.
Right.
But now let's talk about us, the consumers.
Yeah, it's easy to feel like we're just passengers when it comes to supply chain problems,
Right.
but we actually have a much bigger role than we think.
Okay. I'm feeling a bit of pressure now.
Yeah.
I know I've definitely fallen into some of those bullwhip-inducing traps myself,
Yeah.
like stocking up during a sale, even if I don't really need it right then.
Yeah.
Or, maybe even panicking and buying way more than I need when I hear about a possible shortage.
You and me both.
Yeah.
But think about what happens when everyone does that.
Right.
It creates those demand spikes that send everyone scrambling.
Yeah, it throws the whole system off. So what can we do differently? How can we be smarter shoppers and help reduce the bullwhip effect?
Well, first off, just being aware of the problem is huge. Just understanding how it works can help us make better choices. Like when you see a limited time offer, think about if you really need to buy 5 jars of peanut butter right now.
Yeah, or whatever it is.
Exactly.
It's like taking a step back and asking, what's really going on here, instead of just impulsively reacting.
Right. And here are a few more things to think about. Resist the urge to panic buy.
Oh, yeah.
If you see empty shelves, don't just assume the worst. Check with the store or go online before you start hoarding.
Yeah, good point.
It might just be temporary. And be honest with yourself about how much you actually need.
Oh, yeah.
Like, do I really need this much? When will I actually use this? Especially with food.
Right.
Buying too much can lead to waste.
Yeah, which isn't good for anyone.
And consider supporting companies that are already doing things to stabilize their supply chains. Look for brands that offer steady prices and are upfront about what they're doing.
Yeah. Those are great points.
Yeah.
It's empowering to realize we're not just along for the ride. We can make a difference.
Sure. And as more people learn about the bullwhip effect, it can create a wave of change. We can start demanding more transparency, and that can push companies to do better. It can lead to a better system for everyone.
This has been so eye-opening. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of how this all works. And most importantly, I'm inspired to be a more thoughtful consumer.
That's great to hear.
I want to support companies that are working towards a healthier, more sustainable system.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this wraps up our deep dive into the bullwhip effect. We've explored how those tiny changes in what we buy can trigger these huge reactions, and we've learned about strategies that companies are using to make things better. But it's not just on them. It's on us, too. We can all play a part in creating a more stable and sustainable system.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. And until next time, happy deep diving.